First of all, I want to thank, get this on film. I want to thank John Noriega, who's the director of the Chicano Studies Research Center, for saying yes to the videotaping of the writers and the Sun to come here. And I want to thank Rebecca Epstein, who was the events coordinator, and then Lisette Guerra, I don't know if she's here, but she's the librarian, and she was very helpful too. So those people, thank you so much for doing this. And then also thanking Marco to taking time from his attorney business in the Bay Area to come down, and kind of a short notice in some ways, no, but, and we met back in 1987 for the first time when I was visiting professor at Stanford, and he was up in the Bay Area. And a student that I had had back east at Yale, who had written an Acosta analysis, senior thesis advisor, had come out to San Francisco, and he said, I met Acosta's son at a party. And so I said, well, I want to meet him too. So he did come to Palo Alto, and we went in May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, 1987. And then we met again through San Francisco, and he took me through the places, the haunts, you know, Brown Buffalo in San Francisco. Those they weren't there anymore. At least Trader JJ's, it was not part of the landscape anymore in San Francisco. And then he gave me lots of materials about his father, which then became a chapter in one of my books. So it's just reminiscing on the way from the airport to here, you know, about what has happened to our lives in between. You know. Now he's an attorney, practicing attorney. He was just beginning law school at the time when I met him.
Right.
He was a kid when I.
Yeah.
We were all kids at one time. Yeah, so it's good to have Marco here. I'll just say, do you want to say some things?
Well, yeah, thanks for inviting me down. I'm happy to do it, and I would be happy to come in another time. You know, if you,
sure.
I've appeared at a couple of other schools. I was just trying to think of the last time. It's been a while, but like a question and answer kind of a format in the Chicano Studies programs. But yeah, I've always been a kind of observed the development of this field, over the last 30 years, and so it's it's kind of an honor. I mean, it is an honor, really, to be part of this. I don't pretend to be a writer myself. I'm not certainly not trying to follow my dad's footsteps. I have two young school-age girls and a wife, and I work as a lawyer up in the Bay Area, and so that's pretty much what my life is, and I'm really happy doing that. And so trying to trying to follow somebody like this, I just I wouldn't even really consider it. So I in some ways it's been kind of like something that I want to kind of just kind of observe, and but I know it's part of my past, and so I have to acknowledge that. And but it's been very interesting though for me to see all the the growth of this body of literature, and I'm sure that it's the foundation has been laid in this area, such that I think it's it's going to be it's definitely a field that's continues to grow, and people contribute to it year after year. So.
Sure. And as I tell my class with the two first books, that really dealt with the urban area, in Chicano literature. Before it had been rural New Mexico, rural Texas, and then in 1972 we have Brown Buffalo. In 1973 we have Cockroach People, and then one is San Francisco and the other one is Los Angeles. And so to have those two books address the issues and problems of the urban scene. With Brown Buffalo, it's a comparison between Riverbank, where your dad was born, and the sectioned off city that in some ways repeated also in San Francisco as he drives to San Francisco. He makes sure to note the ethnicity of each section of San Francisco, the black area, the Italian area, the Chinese area. So in some way then, from 60s to 1960s back to the 40s and 50s,
Right.
your dad does that with that book. And then Revolt of the Cockroach People, which is about the Chicano movement in East L.A.
Right.
And Los Angeles at a time when things were in a sense exploding in terms of a Chicano movement. And your father then became a public figure here in Los Angeles. We didn't know anything about Oscar Zeta Acosta because he was Oscar Acosta, and then he came down here and he became Oscar Zeta Acosta and became part of the movement. And that's how we know your father, through the books or things that we have read that I've given to the class. But you knew him as his son, and maybe you could start by telling us something that you know about his family or you're named after your grandfather, I think. Manuel?
My full name is Marco Federico Manuel Acosta, and so my dad married an American lady, I guess you call her an Anglo, originally from St. Louis, St. Louis, Missouri, and so in any case, Federico was that name was after a Spanish poet, and then Manuel's Federico.
Great to know that.
So, my mom was a fan of his.
You're named
work.
after Federico Garcia Lorca.
Federico Garcia Lorca. And
Okay,
then Manuel is the grandfather. That's what you.
That's Manuel.
Yeah.
Manuel
Right.
Acosta and Juana Fierro.
And Juana Fierro on the grandmother's side. Right. Yeah.
Did tell us about your grandparents and relationship to your dad.
It's a very complicated subject. Obviously, I'm not going to get it all out in the time that we have here, but I would it was a very conflicted family. My grandparents came up from Mexico in the 30s, and so they were that generation that was trying to assimilate, trying to be American, trying to make sure that everybody spoke English, and they wanted their kids to be like all American, and my dad was in school. He was always, he played, in the band, and never missed a day of class, and it was, really active, and just tried to fit in. So the parents, my grandparents, I thought always, they always supported education. They didn't have much education themselves, but I remember that being something that they really encouraged all the kids. And some of them did, some of them didn't. My dad was there was 5 kids altogether, and the oldest, his brother, died about 15 years back. But he went to law school, so he went to graduate from college and then started law school up in San Francisco, and then unfortunately got hooked on heroin and got in, kind of started taking that track, and sort of self-destructed, and so he never really managed to get out of that. But my dad, I guess you could say also he's self-destructed in a way, but he was I think a little more motivated and very driven, and I think you can see that in his just in his the things that he did. He was always doing something. If it was not, as a writer, he wanted to practice law and become, do that for a while, and then travel, and he was always. I think writing really was his passion actually. But I guess the point is that my grandparents. It's kind of funny because I think he really took after my grandmother. My grandmother was that way, very driven, and I have a lot of memories of them. When I was a kid, because they lived in the little town that Hector referred to, Riverbank. It's right next to a place called Modesto, and little town in the Central Valley, about 2 hours outside of San Francisco. And so I used to go there during the summers. And a lot of times during the year also, I would go down for the weekend. And so, I got to know that area quite well. They, my grandmother was always really, just couldn't sit still. She always had to be doing something, and whether it was reading a newspaper, watching the news, working, cooking, dealing with the kids, and so I think my dad kind of took after her more than, but they had I think a pretty good relationship, but again, you have to keep in mind this is 40s and 50s, and parenting was not really what it is today. I mean, I look at like how my mom raised me, and even my wife and I, our parenting strategies are so much different now, and so there was a lot of abuse and yelling and things like that going on, and so things that you would, I mean, I guess you do still see that today to some extent, but it's there are different techniques now to raising kids. But my grandparents did the best they could, and I think for what they had, they were certainly proud of him for what he was able to accomplish.
And you have aunts. So,
well, the family
sisters.
basically, is consists of they had the 5 children, and then there was three sisters, 2 of whom are still living here in the L.A. area, and then there's a handful of grandkids, probably I guess about 12 or 13. So, but everybody pretty much is in California. A couple of them relocated to the East Coast, but most everybody's out here. So, but it was kind of, I know when my dad, when his whereabouts became kind of unknown, if you will, and kind of questionable, I'm going back to the early mid-70s, I guess. My grandparents were very torn up about it, and it was kind of a big deal for them. They really couldn't quite. I don't think they ever really came to grips with it, coped with it. But
there's a letter that I have that says, "Dear Cholo," can we put that on?
is it Chooch or
Chooch?
Cholo?
No, Chooch is the postcard.
Okay.
See, I know this. Chooch is the postcard, and Cholo is the letter. See, that's who you're named after, Federico Garcia Lorca.
Oh, this is one
And
of
this is his
yeah.
poem, which appears as a reference to in Brown Buffalo, where he says, "I take the green death into me." And Lorca wrote a poem about death, and with the color green, verde que te quiero verde, verdes prados. These are classic lines, and they're invoked by your father in Brown Buffalo, and I always said, this is an influence, and now, since you're named after Federico Garcia Lorca, obviously, yes, you read a lot. At the beginning, when the book was published, a lot of people didn't give him credit for it. They thought it was just kind of spontaneous writing, but if you go back and read it, well, there's intentionality in the things that he wants to do with Ernest Hemingway that you saw also, Federico Garcia Lorca, and Thompson later on. So.
Right.
But there's one that says, "Dear Cholo," and Goya, of course, too. Is in there.
Well, and I think that was actually, I have to give a lot of credit to my mother for because she was.
So here's one. No?
Okay.
Chooch, if you go back there.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, I remember.
And then this one, this is the one you gave me, and this is about Dear Cholo, that I have gone to Los Angeles and now I'm becoming a Chicano. Which is an interesting moment because all of us were becoming Chicanos at that time. And he tells you, that he's working for Cesar Chavez, and then he tells you, learn Spanish and you can be a Chicano too if you want, as he says.
Yeah.
Could you recall those moments with your father? Obviously, a lot of caring that was directed your way to write you this, and maybe your mom collected them, or you, I don't know. But it gives us an insight into the writer and his relationship to his son.
Well, he wrote quite a bit, letters and poems, short stories, and so I've tried to keep all these things organized, and but I remember getting quite a few letters from him. He would work, like when he went to live in Aspen, Colorado. At one point, he would write me frequently, and that tended to be how we communicated. I have a whole stack of letters that they're in the Santa Barbara collection of love letters that he wrote to my mother, and you don't see a lot of that these days. I mean, I guess you could do emails and there's different texting and however we do it now, but this is from that era where people wrote an actual letter, and these were like bona fide love letters. They would just go on and on. I mean, you may have seen some of these, but they're really quite interesting, and really show a lot of his character. But I remember all this quite well. I mean, I was about this is early '70s, and I was born in '59, so 1959, and so we stayed in touch frequently, and he would always. His thing was like, he was very driven in his work, and so even though I think he really was very connected to me, and we had a good bond, and I always felt that my dad really loved me. I didn't have any issue with that, and I guess you might say, but I always knew that his one of his primary focuses was his work, and because he was just always talking about it, and you can kind of get a sense for that from this letter, here where he's talking about going to a new place and becoming part of a movement, and getting involved in the politics and stuff, but yeah, I have a lot of fond memories of, and I lived with him off and on down here during some of that time period.
So this was when he came to Los Angeles, where I began to know this public figure that was Oscar Zeta Acosta, because he was part of the blowouts in East L.A. Sal Castro, who just passed away recently, was the one responsible for those blowouts, and the first large meetings of Chicanos, not so much Chicanas, but Chicanos here at the Grand Ballroom was the first time I saw your dad. And it was the first meeting of Chicanos, 1967, 1968. Certainly the movement began in '65, but it didn't become the identity issue that it began to be 67, 68, 69, about saying, I am a Chicano. That's how I met and saw your dad here at the Grand Ballroom. And then at the sports arena, which does it exist still? Sports arena, next to USC, was a rally that was had by Mexican Americans and some Chicanos, who were in the Chicano movement, to raise funds for the politicians who would be running, in some way representing the Mexican community of Los Angeles, with Anthony Quinn, who was Mexican, but everybody didn't know that until he came. It was the time of coming out as Mexican for film people, So Anthony Quinn came out, you know, I'm a Mexican from Chihuahua, you know, and all that. And then your father, they put the spotlight on him, which appears in Cockroach People, that they put the spotlight on him because he was running for sheriff of L.A. County under the Raza Unida party, which was a party that began in Crystal City, Texas. It's the way that Mexicans began to mobilize or organize themselves in terms of taking over the local elections, you know, like the sheriff or the school board or whatever, or mayor. But that's when I saw your father as a public figure. I didn't know until much later that he was a writer too. And did you come to L.A. in those days with your dad? Did you stay with him?
I came down frequently. I had some, as I said earlier, some aunts that still live here, and so my mother lived in San Francisco. So I spent most of the time with her, but my dad always wanted me to come and, you know, be with him, and you know, there was always this kind of going back and forth thing between him and my mom, and you know, and she would get a little, you know, nervous about, because she knew, you know, kind of what his activities were and such. But you know, she knew that you know, he wanted me to be with him, and so it was never a problem. But yeah, I was here off and on, and I remember a couple of years I enrolled in the local schools. You know, for like I went to a lot of elementary schools. I probably went to about, I'd say at least 10 elementary schools. You know, because I went to some in San Francisco, and then over in the East Bay, and then I lived with him down here, and back in Colorado for a brief period of time. But I spent a fair amount of time down here. And
You were telling me that you were on campus at one time because Acosta's second wife.
Right, Socorro is, I don't know if I can't remember if she's referred to in any of his books.
I think in the introduction.
Right, yeah, that's right, in the introduction she is, right. But yeah, she was a student here at UCLA, and I guess that was probably the last time that I was here at UCLA. But I remember this point about his you know, connection to his work was always fascinating to me. And you know, when I was a kid, I didn't really I was kind of quiet and somewhat shy. You know, he was just kind of overpowering in many ways, and you know, always around these you know, high-profile types, and, you know, political people and other people in the arts and so on and so forth. But you know, he was always very direct and just kind of, you know, said how it was. But during that time period, you know, I never felt like my own personal safety was, you know, it was at risk. I mean, I always felt safe enough, but you know, I can remember a couple of times though where he would always, not always, but he would be honest about what was going on and say, look, you know, I'm involved with these, you know, a lot of political activities down here, and it's, you know, a lot of us are not really that popular, and you know, you have to be prepared for, you know, something to happen. And so, you know, and you know, the police are, you know, they don't necessarily like us, or a lot of us, and so, you know, I remember that. But I never, you know, felt like you know, I had to look over my shoulder or anything.
There's a letter that he wrote to his parents, your grandparents, about leaving San Francisco, and after coming through a depression, and then heading out to Colorado. You gave me all this stuff, by the way.
Yeah, no, I recognize all of it.
This one. Yeah. And this describes, you know, what he was going through in San Francisco, and telling your parents, you know, that the fire was beginning to consume me, or that I've been at war with God and the world since when I don't remember. You know, this is who I am, and I'm writing to you from Colorado because I had to leave, and I assume he was working as an attorney at that time.
Not exactly, but go ahead.
Okay. And then apparently that's when he met Hunter. I'm not sure, but could you tell us something, if you know anything about this period where he decides, I'm leaving San Francisco, I'm going to Colorado?
What happened was, actually, he was not working as an attorney in Colorado. He was working as a dishwasher, and of all things. But he kind of just wanted to get away from everything. He had been working as a basically doing landlord-tenant, kind of cases for low-income clients in the Bay Area, and so he just wanted to get up and go and get away from it. And so he got in his car and drove out to Colorado. He got it. There was a contact that I can't remember exactly who it was, but somebody that had given him a contact, and then that's how he hooked up with Hunter. And when he got to Aspen, and they just kind of became pretty close after that. But he was there for, I guess, about 6 months. But he wasn't doing anything political, like Corky Gonzalez, for example, in Denver, and all that thing. He wasn't really part of any of that. I mean, now this, keep in mind, this is before he went out to L.A. So he was still trying to find his place, and he, as I said, he didn't necessarily give up practicing law, but he didn't become licensed to practice in Colorado or anything like that. He just wanted to get away from everything. So he got a little apartment there, and was there for, as I said, for I guess about a year or so. And but I again, he wanted me to come out there and join him. And the way that he asked me to do that it was a little unusual. I'll never forget. I was going to elementary school in San Francisco at the time, and I guess second or third grade, and so I knew that he was in Colorado because I'd been talking to him with the letters and stuff. And so one day, right before class, I'm out in the playground, with some of my friends, and all of a sudden he walks up, and I hadn't seen him in like 5 or 6 months, and I almost just fell over. I was like, oh my God, what are you doing here? So he came up and said, well, I want you to come to Colorado with me. And I was like, well, okay, but it's like, think mom will, my mom will mind and whatever. And so don't worry about it. So we now keep in mind, this is for a parent to just come and take their kid from school like that, the teacher and the principal, they had they were just it was they were very, very upset. And but he just said, well, I'm taking him. And so anyway, he took me, and we talked with my mom, and eventually within 2 or 3 days we came to an agreement, and then I ended up going back there with him for about 4 or 5 months. But yeah, he wasn't doing any. He was just working as I think doing construction jobs, and then he had a job as a dishwasher, and that's when his relationship with Hunter had just started. So you met Hunter when you went to Colorado, and you knew about their friendship. Well, that would have been the first time. Yeah. And he lived in a little place right outside of Aspen called Woody Creek, and his widow still lives there to this day. It's a very beautiful place, a house with a view of the mountains, and so anyway. But yeah, they spent a lot of time there together, and developed a relationship. And there's quite a few letters, by the way. I don't know if anybody's come across them, but you may have seen some of them. But they exchanged quite a few letters. Hunter was very prolific, and my dad also, as I said, wrote tons of letters. But they had a little thing going. They would exchange letters frequently. And those letters are Hunter? Well, now the interesting thing about that is those letters are Some of them were published in one of Hunter's books that came out a few years before he committed suicide, a few years back. And I can't remember the volume, but it's right before he died. I'd say maybe within the 6, 7, 8 years before, he had been releasing I think there's maybe 2 or 3 books altogether, and they're essentially collections of letters and such. So in this particular one, what he did was he went through his basement, and in his basement he had just, it's just like this. He just had tons of boxes of materials, and there was a lot of stuff from the from his lifetime, but including his letters that he had exchanged with my dad. And so all of those, some of them were released and as part of this collection, and so those are available. And then I guess there's a few that I have that may be down in Santa Barbara, but the rest of them, and I actually haven't seen all of them, because when he passed away, there was I guess a trustee that kind of manages the estate, and so his widow told me though that Johnny Depp purchased all of these materials, and so somehow he owns all of the these letters, and so I don't know where in the heck they are. They're probably I think they're in some place down here in L.A. and but it'd be interesting to go through those.
Sure,
at some point.
Okay. And did you know Hunter was a writer? You knew all those things about him as a little boy?
Well, I did. I think at that time he had just written Hell's Angels, and so that's really kind of what put him on the map. And so I remember, I looked through the book. I don't know if I really understood it completely, but. Because I was, I guess 6 or 7, but that had just come out, and so I knew that he was a writer, and and then of course that was actually before a lot of, he was, that put him on the map, but then I think it was some of his later writings that are probably more, he's more well known for.
Yeah. You also, I have a letter from your dad when he's in the hospital. USC, at the John Wesley Hospital.
No, you mean, is this?
This is 1970.
Oh, okay, so
73.
Yeah.
And it also has the chapter by chapter synopsis of the 3rd book that your dad was going to write, and he wrote that. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's like just in case. So he had all this stuff, and then the last will and testament, in which he gives everything to you. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe easy or not easy. Can you recall what was troubling your dad in the 73?
Well, it seems like he was getting burnt out. He was just kind of. It was really intense for him. Being down here and just. I know from my own practice of law. It's not necessarily a field I'd recommend anybody go into. I'm grateful for what I have, and I'm happy to do it and help clients, and I appreciate it, but it can be dealing with people intimately on issues that are very important to them and part of their personal life. It can be really emotionally draining to a person. And I don't know, I think that's probably what happened, to him at that point. I know he ended up in the hospital for a while, and he was just kind of having like a, I guess I don't really actually know exactly. I don't think I visited him, but he probably just like stress and anxiety. He did have some problems with his with ulcers and stomach issues, but So that I think that's probably what was going on. And that piece that you were talking about, this one right here. That's January '74. That essentially was a will that he, what we call a holographic will, or handwritten will, I think this probably is significant in the sense that I think he kind of knew that eventually something, was going to happen to him, that he was, somebody was going to assassinate him, or, he was going to, it just, it's going to be foul play somehow, whether it was a rival political person, or somebody from law enforcement, or the police, or who knows, but so because he, as I said, he made reference to this to me, frequently. And I remember when I traveled with him in Mexico a couple times, and he brought this up, like you have to be ready because something might happen, and so that's why this will here is just kind of like getting prepared for that. And I don't really, nobody really has any concrete evidence as to exactly what happened to him, but I think the consensus, if you probably looked at all the resources, all the material, all the articles, that it's out there, is that he was killed by a basically I guess the best way to consider would be a rivaled drug person, somebody they were just got mixed up with some of these folks in Mexico, and that's what I understand. But I really honestly don't know. I know there's a couple of people up in the Bay Area that I've talked to over the years, and they were down there with him, around this time period. So this is when he wrote that will. Okay, that was just right before he went down to Mexico for the last time, and so last time I ever heard from him was just shortly after this, and it would have been, I guess, mid '74 approximately, and so as I said, according to these individuals that I talked to, they were down there at some part of northern Mexico, and just got into arguments, and one thing led to another, and he just ended up getting assassinated or killed. But I don't have any corroborating evidence. It's just kind of like hearsay, but it seems to be from a pretty reliable source. This man that I've talked to, he was down. He was actually with him, and I've known him for most of my life, and but he didn't actually witness anything. But that's what he suggested probably happened, and so anyway, I think that was.
And I think back when we first met, you told me you were the last one to hear from him, or to receive a message from him, or?
To my knowledge, I at least as far as the immediate circle of people, the family and close friends, I'm not aware of anybody else that had any contact with him after that last telephone call that I had, from him. Because I actually got a phone call from him, when he was in Mazatlan.
I recall that.
Oh yeah. I can remember it as if it happened yesterday. He was in Mazatlan, and this is something that I probably wouldn't necessarily share to the public if it had been, like maybe a year or two after it actually happened. But I was really young back then, so it didn't matter. But and it doesn't matter now because I really don't. Ages ago. But he had, as I said, been living in Mazatlan. He was still writing. He wasn't really practicing anymore. He'd given up, a lot of his active cases, and he was just involved with narcotics type people, and
I don't really know exactly what their plans were or what they had in mind, but but he did tell me that he called because he wanted to talk to me, and he wanted to say that he was going to be getting on a boat to come up to the Bay Area from Mazatlan, and so I asked him, well, what are you doing? I mean, what's going on down there? And he said, well, I've got a boatload of stuff. We're going to bring it up, and we're going to make a bunch of money when I get up to the Bay Area. And and my mom was in the other room. She kind of knew, hear the conversation, and so I just said, well, okay, just be careful, and I'll see you when you get up here, and then he just said, like, well, okay, you take care of yourself too, and you be careful too, and I'll see you in a few weeks, and then that was it. And so it appeared to me that he was coming up here, with some friends on a boat, and they were going to try to sell some stuff to make money. I didn't really have any other information, and that was it. And so nobody else heard after that.
Yeah, this said, was in April, I think, that what you said.
This would have been in the spring of '74, I believe. And so we were kind of expecting him to come into Santa Cruz, a month or two later, and nobody ever found out what happened after. Now, that piece that you just showed earlier, did you have that up there? Thompson wrote you might call it an unofficial obituary, and so there's an article that where he, elaborates on his theory as to what may have happened, but it's kind of similar. So
that's the article for the Rolling Stone, right?
Right. Yeah. The 10th anniversary issue. That was a cover story. Not a cover story, but it was on the cover.
Right.
So he had talked to a number of folks and came up with his theories.
Hunter wrote Strange Rumblings in Aztlan, the first political article in Rolling Stone magazine when they started back in '67. I think they're getting back to doing more interesting issues and articles that they went through an '80s, '90s thing about just being fluff in some ways, and now they're getting back to it. But and I think these two books are the only, in my mind, I would say, interesting, important books that Rolling Stone published, and that they have had a longevity now, since being taken up by vintage books, and now probably sold forever. Not that they will be selling forever, but do you have any idea how he got to Rolling Stone, and did he know John Wenner, or
well, he got to Rolling Stone through Hunter, essentially, because Hunter's pieces had been appearing in Rolling Stone, and so when my dad started writing, well, he had a number of things that he had already written, some short stories and stuff, but then when he wrote these, or the first book, the Cockroach People, Hunter essentially gave him an introduction to the company, to the owner, to Wenner. At the time, it was the printing division was Straight Arrow Press,
right?
And so that's who published
the first one.
The first
the little Boy Scout.
slide you had up here.
The Little Boy Scout.
The Little Boy Scout, right?
Yeah.
That's right. That was Straight Arrow Press, and so they had a number of authors. I don't remember all of them, but they did agree to publish. They gave him a contract for both of those books for each one, and they initially published. I think it was about 5,000 copies, I believe, for each one, and they're hardcover editions, and then they did some paperbacks also, and then they essentially went out of business. I mean, Rolling Stone didn't, but Jan basically decided to close down the publishing division. So.
Yeah. And when I met you, you were just going to receive, right, the plates from Rolling Stone, or?
Oh, yeah. He had the manuscripts, and I think I got those from him at one point. Unfortunately, I don't have them anymore. It's one of these weird family things where, you know, my aunt got into a dispute and just, I think inadvertently threw out the, you know, the box, something like that. But those are the actual manuscripts for both of these. So, you know, unfortunately we don't have those, but they did get republished, so, you know, and that's the current edition. That's you know, vintage.
Yeah. And your dad had tried for some years to publish with an Eastern publisher, and it's interesting that vintage books that have been 89 picks up and publishes the two books, right?
Yeah, you know, I now that I'm not, I don't know a lot of the details about his the early publishing efforts. I just remember he got hooked up with vintage or with Straight Arrow.
Right. Yeah. And then you contacted Vintage.
Well, I did, yeah, because they were basically out of print, and so you know, I just figured that they should be back in print, and so it took a while though. It took me 2 or 3 years of, you know, I remember sending out these letters to, you know, I mean, I went to all kinds. I must have gone to about 50 or 60 different printing, you know, places. You know, and at that time, you know, to some extent, it's still like that today. But I mean, everything now is, you know, publishing online and such. But there wasn't anything like that back then, obviously. And so, you know, you'd have to try to get an agent or get an editor at one of the publishers to, you know, pick up your stuff. But I went to a lot of people. I went to a lot of academic presses, and I think I went to Stanford. You know, at one point.
Yeah, I wrote the letter for Stanford.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I wish it had been. You know,
Yeah.
it was a good letter, as I recall,
know,
but they
it was a
didn't.
great
They
letter.
decided not to. They passed on it. But
Yeah, the senior editor asked me to write the letter because she read.
that's right. That's right.
Because
Yeah.
of the conference I
Right,
had, she
right.
read the books, and I said, "Yeah, you should do it."
Well, I don't know how I got.
But I have the letter, you know, that I wrote.
Yeah.
And we corresponded back and forth and said, you know, this is Stanford is interested, but didn't.
Right.
publish.
Yeah. Ultimately, they decided not to. But then for somehow I don't even remember how I got to Vintage Random House, but they thought it would be a good addition to their collection.
Sure,
so.
sure.
And
And you
that's-
asked Hunter to do the introduction, or how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I did, and he agreed. But the editor was initially not really happy because he it was kind of tongue in cheek. But he's, you know, I remember he told me, he said, "Look, you know, tell the editor that I want $47,000 for the introduction." And so I remember writing the
letter.
Yeah, to the editor, and I said, well, you know, he's going to do it, but he wants $47,000. So can you come up with it? And she just she was really pissed, and you know, said, how dare he, and this and that, and so. But in any event, they eventually, you know, worked it out with his agent, and I don't think he didn't get $47,000. You know, probably didn't even get more than, I don't know, a couple thousand, you know, for the intro.
And then the afterword, which is a very personal message note to the reader, you know, about your relationship to your father, right?
Well, that was the editor. I forget her name. I don't think she's still there, but she was the one that suggested that, and you know, it seemed to make sense, you know, under the circumstances. So I went ahead and did that. But yeah, it's been you know, quite interesting though to watch, as I said earlier, you know, how they fit into this development of this body of literature, and you know, it's quite fascinating. I don't pretend to know really much about it. I see these, you know, every once in a while I get a copy of a dissertation from some PhD candidate, and they're like, you know, well, they want to, you know, and then they're talking, you know, it's all Greek to me. I don't, you know, they're talking all this literary theory.
Right.
But you know, there's obviously a lot of material in there that, you know.
Yeah, still today. It's still current, and it's still, you know, in some way part of. not just Chicano studies and that literature, but also American studies. When I taught back east, it was of interest from American studies people. And Joel Simon, who was my student back east, is the one who led me to you. And Joel Simon was not Chicano or Mexicano, but he was very much interested in your father's books, and so I was his mentor, for his senior thesis back east. So it fits in there now, as well as within Chicano literature, to think of at what moment in time, with the Chicano movement, which is of course an important movement nationwide. It may have been local, but when you think now of the history up to 2013, it was an important moment in American culture. And then when you think of Brown Buffalo, well, that's 1967, the Summer of Love, all those things, and then your father was in a sense doing his thing with that, the drug trips, love, all that stuff, sex, but doing it from a Mexican, American Chicano perspective. Right?
He was kind of separate himself to some extent. I think from the he wasn't really like kind of a part of the hippie scene, and necessarily. I mean, he was that just really wasn't his character. He was, like I said earlier, very very driven and motivated, and liked to stay active and busy, and just kind of sitting around getting high all the time is just not really. I don't know. He was just way too active for that. But I mean, not that all hippies did that or do that, but I'm stereotyping to some extent. But it's. I think that some of these books, they are local, but there is a crossover, because and a lot of that has to do with his his identifying with, like, when he married my mom, white girl, and just like kind of like felt like part of that culture, but then he also knew that he had grown up in the Barrio and then Riverbank, and so there was a lot of he was very conflicted, I guess you might say today.
Yeah. Did Hunter and your dad have a falling out, or did
I don't think they had a falling out. They just were two very volatile personalities, and they had big egos, and they were both writers, and they were very driven and opinionated. So I don't think there was any falling out per se. I wouldn't say it was a falling out. I mean, they just, they probably would, I imagine, have continued some type of relationship if my dad not, left. But yes, I don't think. I mean, he had some issues with one of the publishers, as I recall, because the proposed publisher of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas didn't want to initially publish the book because they were fearing a libel lawsuit from my father. Now, it's not, that was understandable, given that they were, basically saying that this, living, practicing attorney is a drug-crazed Samoan, and so on and so forth. And, true or not, it was close enough to reality that they, the attorneys, I remember at the time, had advised against it. And so they, they came up with this plan of, where they essentially they asked him to sign a release, and so that's what he did. Just like the release I signed earlier today. That's exactly what they did. And, but there was some negotiations though, and what happened was they, in exchange for the release, he asked them to include a picture, which you actually had up here earlier, the one of Hunter with the black glove, and so they wanted. My dad asked that be part of the deal, that photograph be included on the jacket cover of the book to make it clear that you know that as to who he was, and that, you know, he was not, you know, necessarily some Samoan, you know, guy, and, you know, whatever. This one right here. And so with that, he signed a release. Looking back on it, it's very interesting because I don't know if he had not signed it. I don't know what would have happened. I don't know if that book ever would have been published, quite frankly, and it may have been published, and the publishers might have said, well, we'll just take a chance and see if Acosta sues us. I don't even know if my dad would have sued them. I really don't. You know, he was so unpredictable. I mean, he certainly had grounds, would have had grounds to, but it's not really, that's just not how it went down. I think also there was part of the deal, I don't know if it was actually in the release, but basically Hunter was saying, look, you know, let's just get this thing over with so, you know, I can publish this thing, and you know, I'll give you a connection to Jan, and, you know, you can get some of your stuff published. And so that's how, you know, I think that was part of the negotiations also. But there's kind of a little minor controversy about the authorship of the Vegas book. Now, you know, I don't know if any, it's really not, probably not any big deal, but I know there's some people that I've talked to that have suggested that both of them actually wrote it, and that they, you know, they both should have gotten credit for it. And I remember one time one of my dad's sisters, who's still living down here today in Los Angeles, that's going back about 15 years, but you know, she said, look, you know, I want to go back, and I want to tell Hunter, I want him to tell me to my face, you know, what really went down as far as the authorship of this book. So I said, okay, well, let me call him. So I arranged for us to go back there, and he said, yeah, have her come, you know, come on back. So we went back, and this is like in the early 90s. Stayed there for about 2 or 3 days, and they had quite an extensive talk about this. And I wasn't present at the actual, when they were talking, because I was in the other room, you know, talking with somebody else. But she told me afterwards that, you know, they had talked about it, and I think in so many words he suggested that my dad was responsible for some, you know, part of it, and you know, I don't know how much, or you know, to what extent, but anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting, you know, but that's kind of just water under the bridge at this point, because
well, the Samoan drives the book. Without the Samoan, there is no Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I've seen this photo on the internet, but your father has been taken out, so it's just Hunter. Do you know why someone wanted to do that, or there's no significance?
You know, the best I can recall is that, I mean, that was they were actually there at that particular hotel. I mean, I remember that. So that's an actual photograph. It actually took place. I wasn't there, but I remember talking with him when he was down there. So I don't have any reason to believe that it was, you know, manufactured, or the photograph itself. So because they were actually there together, you know.
Sure.
I mean, that's historical fact.
Right. Yeah. So there is some manuscript that I have read, that I have, I think, too, where your dad says, you know, that all the credit that has gone to Hunter for the Gonzo journalism should be mine too. Do you know about that?
You know, like I said before, you know, writers typically have big egos, and it's probably with good reason. That's why they, you know, write things that are interesting and that we all like to read. You know, I think I don't really know. I would say possibly, but you know, hey, you know, if I suppose if my dad were living today, if he came back and we had a discussion about this, I would say, well, you know, you didn't have to sign the release.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you shouldn't have signed it. But so, but yeah, no, I think that. But you know, the one of the things I was going to say is I think it's good to see that his works are recognized, because I think a lot of folks, they just kind of you know, he's linked up with this Thompson writer, and you know, there's some interesting things, I suppose, in that regard. But you know, he's also was I think a very fine writer, you know, in his own right. The hometown, incidentally, where he spent a lot of time, Riverbank, they evidently just in the last couple of months are setting up a collection of his materials in their local library. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because a lot of the people there in that town don't really, you know, they don't really know about a lot of his, you know, his writings, or you know, what he did. And so anyway.
Yeah, yeah. There's a film, as I said, that I've seen of you. You took me to Anne Henry's house. Anne Henry, right?
Anne Henry, right.
Anne Henry in San Francisco, and the film is your dad reading Brown Buffalo. You're, I think, on this side, and then the owl. The other.
Her husband.
Her
right.
husband is over here, and I think they're high and they're drinking and they're having a good time. Right? Could you talk about drugs or anything like that with your dad? I mean, I think someone would die in Brown Buffalo if you took all those drugs. You know, that's fiction. But you know, your dad also said he took LSD.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about with you know, drugs and Oscar was that you know, he wasn't what I would call like your modern day junkie. You know, somebody that's hooked on drugs, that clearly has a documented substance abuse problem, and that's going through treatment. And you know, he wasn't to that point. A lot of these things, you know, it was more of like this experimental, you know, with him. And as far as LSD, I mean, you know, everybody was doing that back then. Not everybody, but you know, people in the underground culture were, right. Certainly. And I guess that's what I meant, you know, people, sure, in that. Sure. And so, but he never really, I mean, he did it. And yeah, I you know, really can't give you like an estimate as to how many times, but I mean, I remember when I was living down here in LA with him, and you know, he would have his clients come over to the house and be, you know, under the influence, and you know, he would tell me what he was doing, and you know, show me exactly what it was, and describe for me, like, you know, that it was a certain chemical that was, you know, he was doing to try to, you know, try to help him you know, reach some state of knowledge, or you know, whatever. And you know, so that, I mean, I remember that, but I don't think that he had like a hardcore drug problem. Now I know, I mean, you know, I know my dad. I mean, he drank alcohol, but he wasn't like the kind of you know, he was just he didn't really let it get in the way of his you know, his work. I mean, he was very disciplined. You know, he would. I remember, you know, when you know, writing a lot of these stories in these books, you know, he would wake up typically very early in the morning, and he would, you know, often swim, you know, do exercise, and then, you know, start typing, and he would like work for, you know, 10, 12 hours a day, and very, very methodical and extremely disciplined. So, you know, drugs was, I think it was just something that he was kind of experimenting with in a sense. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of my, you know, my take on it. But, you know, it's, I mean, every other writers, I suppose they, you know, kind of really, it consumes them, and it, you know, it's part of their writing, and I don't know, defines the writing somehow. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely there, right. You know, because that time period, I think.
Sure. Yeah. And this figure, the owl, who is Robert Henry, right?
Correct.
Who, and Henry, they're the couple, right?
That's right. Yeah, they were just friends. They were friends of his that he had known from the San Francisco days.
Uh-huh. Because in Thompson's biography, Robert Henry appears as a kind of a local drug dealer, something
Right,
like that.
right. Yeah, well, that's what I understand happened. I think Thompson probably, was able to get some of his, material
Okay.
from,
Okay.
as I understand. Again,
Yeah, and Anne has passed away, right?
no, he
He
passed away,
Yeah.
but she's still living. Yeah, she's still living in San Francisco. And so a lot of those characters are still in the area, but a number of them have passed out.
And I recall when I met you, you said that the couple had been like your parents after the disappearance of your father.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, they knew him quite well. He, of course, you will recall in the book, she's the real life character for the lady named referred to as Alice.
Right.
And so, so they were very close, all three of them, and he lived with them off and on, and so they got to know each other, quite well, and kept up over the years. But I've kept up with them, with the family, and to this day, I still have a close connection with them. So.
Questions from the audience about Brown Buffalo or about Acosta or Revolt? Anyone? Some of you have read the book.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I just asked, for the time that you guys were together, what was your relationship with him? You said that you would spend a lot of time apart, but when you were actually living with him and staying with him, how did you guys interact?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm kind of trying to go back in my memory here. I think one of the things that I remember, I think about him, and it kind of sticks out. He always incorporated me into his life, into his daily life, and so. Like if, for example, he was writing, he would tell me what he was writing, and then often after he would read it and ask me what I thought about it, so we related a lot. He was very personal, and asked me a lot of questions, and but always supported my interests. And I remember he was a musician, and I had just started showing some interest in music and guitars and stuff, and so he kind of encouraged that. And but I would say he was very communicative. He had a pretty good sense of humor, but he could be very emotional too. He sometimes his temper would come out, and if he thought something wasn't right, he would tell you, and whether it was some on a political issue, or something having to do with the family, or really anything. Very outspoken, and he was always that way with me. So, I would say I got to know my dad pretty well, under the circumstances. I mean, I spent a fair amount of time with him. But the last I saw him I was 14, so, I don't know what our relationship would be like today. So. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you also grew up with kind of a Chicano identity that he was also kind of developing as he was kind of part of the movement. I was wondering if that kind of trickled down to you as a child too, or.
Wow, That is a very good question. I really don't know. I would say I was aware of it, but a lot of people at that time, you would say Chicano, and they would be like, "What does that mean? What is a Chicano?" And maybe they're, I guess people are still asking the question, but it's probably more defined now, and there's more of a sense of what it means, but yeah, I mean, I knew that he was identifying with his Mexican side, and so that was always, he was pretty good about talking about that, because you can see from some of these letters, that he would, and especially down here, I remember when we lived down here, it was very big, and all the little political slogans and those little buttons that you'd get, and with the little slogans on them, and so yeah, it was he talked about it a lot, but as far as what I identified with, my mom was basically a mix of Welsh and English, Irish, German, and so I had that side of the family, and so I would always get her 2 cents worth, as to what kind of influenced by her side of it as well, but as I recall, my mom was very supportive of those. That because she knew that my dad had this other this background and where he was from, and so she always was very supportive of my Mexican side, I guess, if you will. She very sensitive about it, and knew that a lot of the discrimination that had taken place, and so she definitely encouraged me to be to identify with both both cultures, really. It's not, I mean, it's kind of a mix, it's I mean, everybody's really, we're all kind of a mix in some sense. That's a good question. I mean, it's, I don't know, there's not an easy answer to it.
I guess I wondered, how was the voice of the actual person that you knew different from the voice that we read or that we hear through the books?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's fascinating to think about that. Well, first of all, I haven't heard the actual voice. Obviously, it's been many years. The recordings that are out there now are basically include the one we were talking about earlier, the Floricanto
at USC.
At USC, where he's reading from the Cockroach People. That it's kind of interesting to hear his accent, because I guess it seems accurate to the best of my recollection. That Floricanto piece is pretty much is to what I remember. I remember him speaking like that, but there was like that kind of L.A. Kind of mix of Mexican, mix of like Spanish, English, Spanglish, or whatever you want to call it, and that kind of accent, and like especially like folks from East L.A. and like they would have a way of saying, instead of saying Los Angeles or L.A., he would say I'm from L.A., and it would be like an accent that you could. I played music for a long time, so I have really sensitive ears. I pick up these little nuances, and but that East LA, kind of accent. I know he kind of took that on for a while. Which made sense because he was living right there in the heart of East LA. I mean, that's where he lived most of the time. But as far as the inflections and the intensity and the emotions, I would say it seems to be what I remember, Yeah. I don't have any other, I wish I had some other, I've got, that one recording that's in the library, that's a good one. The Santa Barbara Library, yeah. That really shows, that shows some interesting things about his like, because I remember, as I recall, at one point he was trying to get me to talk, and I was really quiet and shy, and I didn't really want to say anything, and so the other guy that was in there, Al, he was kind of supporting me and telling my dad, hey, just leave him alone, leave him alone. It's okay, he doesn't have to talk, But my dad was like, trying to get me to say something, and he could be really overpowering, and sometimes, and he would say things that were really intense, and but that's just how he spoke, he just said what was on his mind, he really didn't. He didn't hide things. He wasn't the kind of person, that kept things from me.
I don't know if you're able to say, but what did living in San Francisco mean for your father, and is that where you're based now?
Yeah, that's right. I'm based in San Francisco,
yeah,
yes.
What does it mean for you now?
Well, I think for him, let's see. He got to San Francisco because my mom was working at a hospital down in Modesto, a couple hours outside of San Francisco. And so she had been living in San Francisco after she first came out there, in the 50s from St. Louis with her sister. And so they slowly, basically that became their new home. And I think that the San Francisco was always like kind of a really big place, especially for somebody who's from Modesto. Modesto has grown a lot in recent years, but at that time it was still a pretty small town and a small agricultural town. And there still are people that have never wouldn't even think about going to San Francisco, or if they had, it would be like going to some far away place that they just wouldn't really know what to do there and how to cope with it. So I don't know. It was kind of, I guess, maybe geographically like a place that he identified with because it had a diversity that he really didn't have in Riverbank. Riverbank, you basically just had the white folks and the Mexicans on the other side of the train track. That's kind of how it was divided up. And but San Francisco kind of like opened up things to him, and then when he was up there, there was all the Beat Generation writers, were just again, their stuff was coming out, and so he was kind of he was up there, I guess, just a few years after that, but still close enough. And so I don't know. I think it was a place where he felt comfortable. He could write. He liked. He lived in a lot of different places in San Francisco. He lived in apartments. He lived in hotels. There was one place in the Mission District where he stayed for, gosh, it seemed like months on end. And it was like his favorite place. And it was just this little tiny, kind of smelly, hotel room. But he liked it because he could write. He could be like alone and with his little typewriter and just crank out the pages. So I think you'd always would identify with San Francisco in many ways. But, as far as I'm concerned, I live in a little town called Mill Valley. It's right outside of San Francisco, and about 15 miles. But we're always in the city, and so I don't know. I kind of think of it as my home. I've gone away a lot and been to different places, but I always kind of come back there, and it's I don't know. It's for me just I have a lot of memories there, and I spent a lot of time there as a kid, but so it's changed though, quite a bit. Yeah, it has changed. Still always be San Francisco. There's always going to be hills and
Yeah.
windy, fog.
Mm-hmm.
So.
When did you first read Brown Buffalo, and what was your experience reading it?
Wow. Boy, I would say, I guess I first read it when my dad read it to me. So I guess now that's not necessarily me, reading it myself, but I read a lot to my kids, and I was just thinking about that. Actually, it was kind of neat, for him to actually read it. So
Well, the film is. That's Santa Barbara. He's reading.
Right.
Rumble.
Right. But he actually did that when he was writing it. He would write write all day, and then if I was around, or because I was there during a lot of the writing, or if my aunt was there, whoever was there, he would just say, okay, why don't you guys come and sit down, and I want you to listen to what I wrote. And so he'd read it, and we talk about it. But I didn't. I guess I first read it when it came out, which was in the early 70s.
72.
Yeah, but I don't think I really, I don't think I think a lot of things in there that I really didn't understand, but I think I did actually read it straight through probably about that time. And then I guess since then I've probably gone through it, a few times over the years. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to read it at different times in your life. You kind of you understand things differently. I guess just like all literature, really. You read it at certain time periods and have different perspective on it.
Do you like it?
But
is it your kind of?
Yeah, I like it because it's direct and simple in terms of the language, but I would say that in some ways it's kind of too close to me, and so I almost don't. There's a part of me that doesn't really want to read it, because it's like, there's some things that were not necessarily, joyous, and there was, some things that were, I wouldn't say, really, really bad memories, but things that, that kind of brings things up in my mind, with regard to some of the family, and so, I think now some of it was fictionalized, but so in a sense I kind of maybe, I don't know, maybe I put up a wall, in some ways. One of the stories that I actually thought was very interesting, and I actually was able to really kind of get into in some ways, and not have that kind of reaction, was that short story. It was a couple of his short stories, because they weren't like so personal, and I know one of them was the Perla, his pig, and that I think was a really fine piece. And then there's, yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of other short stories. But.
Wow, what a wealth of
That's a lot.
information you've given us. Yeah.
Well,
you didn't expect this.
there's a lot. There's so much more. I mean, you can only do so much in a couple hours. But.
Yeah. One last question, anyone? You're from?
I'm originally from Mexico, but I also live in the Central Valley.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot about Henry Thompson, but I was also aware that he had some interaction with Hemingway, and I wanted to see how this played into his writing. Like, do you know anything about his relationship with Hemingway?
Well, I think that what I do know is that he read a lot of Hemingway, and he probably influenced his writing. I'd say in some ways. I don't know if he actually ever met up with him in real life, but he did on his way back to Colorado. I remember. I think somebody had given him some contact to Hemingway's grave, and like he wanted to go and visit it, and so I think that actually happened. But yeah, he read quite a bit of Hemingway, and I think that, you know, for sure influenced his writing. I would say probably what little I know about, you know, Hemingway's life, they probably were very similar characters, you know, in many ways. Just, you know, really complex, larger than life kind of, you know, figures. And it's, I don't know, the writer's life is very strange. I don't know if I could do it. You know, I've tried to write a little bit, and, you know, I write letters, and you know, I've tried to write a couple of stories, and I just, you know, I don't want to do it. I can't do it. It's just something, you know, you have to be so consumed with, and so driven, and it's something that, you know, that focus and that intensity, and you know, and I'm glad there are people that are able to do it, you know. But yeah, good question.
Okay, well,
Thank you all for
thank you.
inviting me
No,
down.
thank
I
you.
really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, after all these years. Yeah, yeah. Good.